Hi, welcome to my non-rotational Zulrah guide. Now, if you are watching this, I'm already assuming that you're way too desperate enough to actually look for a Zulrah guide that approaches things differently, so I'm gonna assume that you know where the boss is situated and you already have a gear set up, so I don't actually have to go over those things and I can keep the guide mostly simple. But if you don't, the wiki is there, and the wiki has guide setups according to, which items are stronger and weaker, so you can sort of use that to guide yourself. Just keep in mind that the better your gear is, the more mistakes you'll be able to afford, because, well, you just do more DPS, so yeah, you'll just be able to afford way more mistakes. So without further ado, let's actually get into the boss mechanics, and let me explain how the boss actually works. So let's talk about the most important part of the boss, which is how it damages you and how you damage the boss. So Zulrah is comprised of 3 phases: the green phase, the blue phase, and the orange phase. The green phase attacks you with ranged, the blue phase attacks you with both ranged and magic, but it mostly attacks you with magic, so the blue phase means magic. And the orange phase means melee. Now, out of these 3, the melee phase you don't actually pray against like you do in the other 2 phases, because the melee phase actually locks on you and it's based on where you are in the arena, where you need to move 2 tiles away in order to avoid its attack. It sounds scary, but it's actually the easiest phase to deal with out of the entire kill. So Zulrah will sort of like open its wings, and at that moment it means that the central tile is locked on you and the attack will apply on a 3x3 radius. And that is the moment where you run away 2 tiles. Unless you are next to a pillar, which then Zulrah won't actually even damage you. So with the melee phase essentially dealt with, let's actually talk about the other 2 phases, which is where the brunt of the damage from both you or Zulrah will actually be at. As I've mentioned, the green phase will attack you with ranged, the blue phase will attack you with magic. That's why you need to pray against the boss. The way you attack it is the opposite. So the green phase you attack it with magic, the blue phase you attack it with ranged. A good way to get into a rhythm is to simply link your protection prayers to an attack style. So every time you switch to magic, you have the ranged setup. Every time you switch to ranged, you have the magic setup. Now, usually one of the hardest things about this boss for people is knowing when the phases are going to spawn, especially because if you are trying to remember all of the rotations, it can feel really overwhelming. But there's a little trick that is actually super simple to understand and to remember, that applies throughout the vast majority of the kill. So here's the trick: Zulrah won't ever attack you twice in a row with the same style. So if you are praying magic, you can then switch your prayer to ranged, because the next phase will either be ranged or melee. It won't be a magic phase again. Zulrah will always respect that, even in the exception of 2 rotations where there's one phase where the green phase or the ranged phase will appear twice in a row. One of them won't actually attack you. So when it comes to using protection prayers, the protection prayers will always be used from magic to ranged to magic to ranged to magic to ranged, or from ranged to magic, ranged, magic. So for example, let's remember one of the rotations, if I can remember it, just to give you an example. So Zulrah usually for every phase spawns green in the middle. That phase doesn't really count as it doesn't attack you, so you shouldn't really be too worried about it. The second phase is where the rotations actually start, and which is what's going to decide the rotations. But essentially, what I want you to look at this, and if you take away the melee phase, because again, you don't pray against the melee phase, the protection prayers that you'll actually use are magic, ranged, magic, ranged, magic, ranged, magic, ranged. All the way, right? That makes it much easier to remember not just what to pray against, but also what weapons to use. So now that you know how the boss attacks you and how to attack the boss, the other big piece of this boss is where to stand in the arena. Zulrah will move around throughout the arena as the kills proceed, so where do I stand? And well, fairly simple. The arena has a U-shape, and these 4 tiles are the only tiles that you actually need to stand on throughout the entire kill. Now, that's all good and all, but little problem. When do I know which tile to stand on? And well, that's where we're going to divide the arena in 2. We're going to divide the arena in the right side and the left side. Now the reason as why you're doing this is because usually when it comes to killing Zulrah, you will always either be on the right side or on the left side, as those will always be the required sides to be on without the toxic clouds. The toxic clouds are another mechanic that Zulrah has. Essentially, throughout the kills, Zulrah will spawn these toxic clouds, these venom clouds that will do venom damage. So even if you have venom protection, you won't actually get venomed, but you will get damaged by venom, or venom will damage you. These clouds will be present all throughout the arena, with the exception of certain spots where you will be inevitably standing to kill the boss. So all you have to do is usually go from left to right in the arena, but these clouds can actually be used to know when to move to the other side of the arena. So you either move every second phase, or every time toxic clouds are despawning. So if you are in the right side of the arena and you're seeing the toxic clouds disappear, it means go to the other side of the arena, the left side of the arena. And once you're in the left side of the arena and you see toxic clouds disappear, you move to the right side of the arena, and so on and so forth. Now that's all fine and dandy, but there's another question remaining. How do I know which square to stand? North or south? Cool, I know that I should stand on the left side, but there's 2 squares on this side. And well, for that, as a rule of thumb, always go to the corner. If you already know that you can't stand near the pillars, use that. Another mechanic that's all I can do before I go that has nothing to do with the where to stand in the arena, but I want to put it here anyway, are the Snakelings. The Snakelings are a complete non-mechanic. That's why you use Rings of Recoil or Ring of Suffering if you have one in this boss. It's because the boss will spawn these minions that have 1 HP. They can max at 15 and they do typeless damage, and for the most part they just get dealt with by Rings of Recoil. So they are pretty much a non-mechanic. You just should pay attention to your HP every once in a while, but you shouldn't worry too much about it. And finally we come to the last mechanic, the Jad Phase, which sounds way scarier than it actually is. Contrary to Jad Phase, if you miss a switch, you won't actually get one shot by it, so not to worry. So what is the Jad Phase? The Jad Phase, first of all, is always green, and the Jad Phase will use both ranged and magic against you. The thing is, Zulrah will always alternate between both of them, so the way you counter Jad Phase is literally by changing from ranged to magic to ranged to magic to ranged to magic. You get the point. And if that sounds familiar, it's because yes, this is the same concept as I already talked about, but essentially instead of being throughout phases, it's just in the same phase. This phase won't actually use melee, and this phase, depending on which side of the arena, will start with a different prayer. So on the left side, Zulrah will start with ranged, and then it will change to magic, and then ranged, magic, ranged, magic. But on the right side, Zulrah will actually start with magic, and then it will change to ranged, magic, ranged, magic. Now the biggest problem with Jad Phase that people tend to have is, okay, Jad Phase is actually easy to deal with, although it's a bit counterintuitive, because as soon as you see the attack coming towards you, you need to change prayers, because Zulrah will actually apply the attack before it hits you. So you can't actually switch prayers at the last minute to actually, or the last second to actually avoid damage. But outside of that, when do I know that Jad Phase is actually going to spawn, right? Like, I just don't know. And here's the thing, there's a little trick as well that you can see to know when the Jad Phase is going to spawn. The Jad Phase, the green phase, is always preceded by a blue phase, a magic phase. And the magic phase will attack you, will spawn Snakelings, and will spawn toxic clouds all in the same phase. If Zulrah does this, if a blue phase does these 3 things in the same phase, the next phase will be a Jad phase. And how do you know which side of the arena to stand to know if you start playing ranged or magic? Pretty simple. If you follow the toxic laws despawn and go to the other side, you will be on the right side of the arena by the time the Jad phase spawns. And that's really all there is to it. Just a couple of considerations before I actually finish the guide. Number 1, I would suggest to keep your HP above 50, around that. And secondly, you will die a lot at the beginning. It took me 50 kills, I think, or 50 tries before I got my first kill. And ultimately, I would always prioritize switching your prayers to avoid taking damage, then prioritize DPS, because avoiding damage means that you will do more DPS in the long run, because you don't need to waste ticks actually healing and whatnot. And when it comes for food, I would always bring either sharks or carambons or a combo food, so you can eat them in the same tick, and instead of just healing 20, you can heal 38, right? It makes you overall much safer, and if you're sitting at 50 HP, for example, and you see that Zulrah is gonna throw a ranged attack at you when you're playing magic, you can always, combo it, and it's way safer for you. But yeah, other than that, I've been meaning to make this guide for a few years now, mainly because the way I learned Zulrah was just by, remembering very basic details like, green means range, then you attack with magic, right? And then just sort of bashing my head into a wall until it finally gave a kill, so I could actually finally do the diaries. And once I started doing Zulrah, and now that I have over 6,000 kills, I started realizing that the boss is actually pretty consistent. It only has some exceptions to the rule. And that's because when the boss came out, the boss was so consistent that you could do it without taking any damage whatsoever. So Jagex introduced stuff like Snakelings and made the magic phase range you as well from time to time, in order to actually, deal damage to you, because the boss was way too consistent. Because outside of that, yeah, the boss is pretty consistent, and I really did not like having to learn, because every guide would tell me, oh yeah, just remember these 4 rotations and like all of these phases in the rotation, and then you'll be able to kill the boss. But if you are for the first time dealing with both prayer switching and gear switching in a boss fight for the first time, having to remember like 4 different rotations and different phases, it's just not an easy thing to do. And in reality, you don't need to, as the mechanics are way more simple than that. But yeah, that was my guide. Thanks for watching.